Angel's Key. Written by Leon Hamilton. Narrated by the Ghost of 94. Featuring voice talent from Creepy Face, Melissa Medina, Drew Blood, Geoff Sturtevant, Paul J. Mcsorley, and Erik Peabody. I was cursed at birth. My dad was a scumbag, and my mother wasn't much better. Between the two of them, I spent the first half of my life in poverty, and the other half on the run. We bounced from place to place, barely scraping by till we wound up in Florida. I was 10 by then, and had grown accustomed to the life. My dad was running drugs for the locals, and my mother would spend her time getting high or scamming out-of-towners. With role models like that, it's no wonder I turned out all fucked up. By the time I was 14, I'd been arrested multiple times and was on my way to becoming a career criminal. When I turned 17, I graduated to the big league. I was caught robbing a liquor store and sentenced to 10 years in prison. I was released after 7 years and swore I was changing my life. I tried to stay on the right path, but the money wasn't adding up. I'd gotten to the point I was spending more than I made just to get by. It wasn't long before I was back doing what I did best. After making a few moves and linking up with the right people, I was right back in the swing of things. New money, new me. I was partying every night, living like a fucking rock star. So of course, shit went sideways. One night, some guy tried to kill me at the gas station, and I shot him. I wish I could say it was an accident, but it wasn't. He missed. I didn't. I'd just finished pumping gas when the rear window of my car shattered. I never even heard the shot. I just pulled my pistol and fired. Everything happened so fast. There was no time to think. I didn't even know I'd hit him till I was driving past his body. Out of everything I'd done up to that point, I'd never killed anyone. Since going back to prison wasn't an option, I ran. I sold everything I owned and stole a boat from the marina. My plan was to sail off into the sunset and never look back. It sounded great on paper, but my life is my life, and nothing's ever that easy. 3 weeks later, I was on a life raft with a bottle of water and a bag of cash, thinking it was over. The night before, I'd been hit by a storm, and the boat sank. Now, I was baking in the sun, wondering how long it would take for me to starve to death. After a couple of days, I washed up on an island called Angel's Key. The locals took me in and got me back on my feet. No one knew me, and no one cared about my old life. This was it. My second chance was here, and I was going to make it work. Almost everyone on the island had come from somewhere else. They'd built their own little paradise in the middle of nowhere, and I couldn't have been happier to be there. I changed my name to Victor and became a fisherman. After a year or so, I met Maria. She was wild and beautiful, with emerald green eyes, flowing dark hair, and the body of a goddess. She hated me when we first met, but I eventually wore her down. We fell in love. Together, we built a house on the south side of the island and started our own little farm. It was perfect. 2 years later, a yacht dropped anchor on the north side of the island. The ship belonged to a man named Anton Gilroy. He and his sons, Paul and Francis, were party people. They would host massive events and invite everyone on the island. They quickly became well-liked and accepted by the locals. After a while, things started to change. The Gilroys' visits to the island turned into extended stays. Instead of staying on the boat, they would live on land, and eventually started having things shipped in. They brought in private contractors and hired the islanders to help build their compound. When that was done, they built housing for us as a reward. When it was all said and done, the Gilroy family was in control. Slowly but surely, they started bringing in their own people. These weren't your run-of-the-mill party-goers. They were goons for hire. Some were ex-military, but most of them looked like they were straight out of prison. Paul, the younger of the two brothers, claimed they were for security. According to him, they were there to protect everyone. Most of the others accepted it, but Maria and I moved back to our home on the south side of the island. Our old place wasn't much to look at, but it was good enough for us. We had power thanks to a solar generator and clean water from a cistern. As far as food went, we had a small garden, and fishing provided us more than enough meat. 6 weeks after the Gilroys took control of the island, someone sank all the fishing boats. 2 nights later, the radio tower was destroyed, and we were officially cut off from the outside world. Out of the 31 people originally on the island, more than half of them were now living around the Gilroys' compound. The few of us left were scattered. Maria and I lived close to the beach. Old man Mateo's place was deep in the jungle, and the Hernandez family had a camp not far from him. One afternoon, Maria and I were on our way home from foraging when a group of Gilroy's guards stopped us. There were 4 of them, led by a large man I'd heard people call Tex. As soon as we stepped into the trail, 3 of the guards drew down on us. With a smug expression, the big man stepped past his gunners and stood in front of us. Now when I say big, I mean big. The man is huge. He reminds me of the Mountain from Game of Thrones. Flashing a fake grin, he nodded at us, then looked at what we were carrying.
Good afternoon. Looks like a decent haul you got there. That's good. You two should fit right in. Me and the boys are going around spreading the word. There's a new way of doing things, and the Gilroys would appreciate your cooperation. Everyone is expected to pitch in. You'll pull your weight, or you'll find a new place to live. Your choice.
I fully understood what they were doing. They were extorting us, and there wasn't much we could do about it. Maria laughed sarcastically and was about to say something before I jumped in. How? Without our boats, we're stuck here. We couldn't leave if we wanted to.
Not my problem. Figure it out.
Motioning for his men to lower their weapons, Tex looked at us one last time before walking away. Maria and I watched as the 4 of them vanished into the jungle. Once they were out of sight, she nudged me.
I need to check on my family.
Her parents and 2 younger brothers were living by the compound. If Gilroy's people were pulling this shit on us, we couldn't imagine what they were going through. Since her parents didn't like me, she went to check on them, while I went to check on the handful of others that chose to stay on their own. My first stop was Mateo's place. Originally from Germany, Mateo moved to the island back in the 70s. No one knows why, but some of the older people say that he was hiding from the government. His house was deep in the jungle. It took a while to get there, and as usual, he was up to something. For someone his age, the old dog was in shape. He was always busy. Today, he was chopping firewood when I got there. Setting the axe down and wiping the sweat from his forehead, he waved.
Guten Tag, my friend. How are you?
Oh, can't complain. Has anyone from the compound been here?
Nein. Why?
When I told him what was going on, he nodded thoughtfully for a moment, then looked around before responding.
We will see what they are made of, when they come to take what's mine. Thank you, my friend. Safe travels.
Safe travels was Mateo's way of saying get lost without being rude. Taking the hint, I waved to him and headed for the Hernandez camp. Camilla, Hugo, and their 5 children, 2 boys, 3 girls, were one of the few native families left on the island. They lived even further into the jungle than Mateo, but the trails made it easy to walk. When I stepped into the clearing, my heart stopped. There was no one there. The Hernandez camp was always active. To see it empty was a shock. Whatever happened there happened fast. The only signs of a struggle were a couple of turned-over chairs near the fire pit. Everything else looked normal. When I went to check on the main house, I found something strange. There was a thin coat of white powder covering everything inside. When I opened the door, the stuff swirled in the air. My instincts told me not to go inside. Stepping back, looking in, I tried to see if I could spot anything. There were still plates of food on the table. That would have been strange on its own, but what was on the plates got my attention. The food looked shriveled and dry, like it had been dehydrated. Trying not to overthink it, I turned my attention to the rest of their little village. The pig pens were empty, and all their chickens were missing. I stood there for a while, letting it sink in. This was all wrong. The Hernandez family were proud to stand on their own. I couldn't imagine them packing up and moving to the compound. Not wanting to jump to the wrong conclusion, I decided to go see for myself. The trip to the compound wasn't bad, but it took time to get there. Staying out of sight by hiding in the brush, I took a moment to look around. It had taken years to build the place, and it was pretty damn impressive. There were 16 homes built in a circle, with the compound sitting in the center. A dense row of trees separated the compound from the houses, and a massive communal garden separated the houses from the jungle. To my surprise, I spotted Hugo and Camilla picking tomatoes in the garden. They were smiling and having a good time. I felt kind of silly now that I was seeing them. Laughing to myself, I stepped out and waved. They ignored me. Thinking maybe they hadn't seen me, I tried to get their attention. Walking up to the edge of the garden, I called out to them, but they never looked in my direction. When they started to wave, I casually strolled over to speak with them. "Hey guys, how's everything going?" The 2 of them paused for a long moment, smiling at me. There was an emptiness in their eyes that caught me off guard. Normally, they were warm, caring people. Now they seemed hollow. It was like staring into the eyes of a mannequin. Maintaining a forced smile, Camilla tilted her head to the side and said, "Good." I hesitated, waiting for her to continue, but she didn't. It was awkward and uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Hugo was behind her, staring at me with the same odd smile. Seeing the conversation wasn't going anywhere, I told them to say hello to their kids for me and went to find Maria. Her family's home was on the far side of the compound, so the walk gave me a chance to see a few people. For the most part, everyone I ran into was happy. They weren't like Camilla and Hugo, but there was something off about them. To be honest, they all seemed high as shit. I was starting to feel like I'd missed the party. When I got to the house, Maria's brothers were outside. Diego was standing in the yard, talking to a girl I didn't recognize. Diego was the older of the two boys, at 16. By the look in his eye, I could tell what he was up to. Samuel, Maria's other brother, was 9. He was playing with a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, that looked a lot like the girl Diego was talking to. They had reddish blonde hair and similar facial features. I figured they were related. I spoke to everyone, then went inside. Maria's father was asleep in his recliner, while she was in the kitchen with her mother. The scene was surreal. It was strange how quickly everyone adjusted to this new way of life. Can't say I blamed them, though. It was pretty fucking sweet. It was almost like being back home. When I walked into the kitchen, Maria was sitting at the table, eating a bowl of stew. She smiled at me, and I stepped over and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. Her mother, who'd been pouring herself a cup of coffee, looked at me and shook her head. When I said her parents didn't like me, I was specifically talking about her. The old lady couldn't stand me, but she tolerated me for Maria. Muttering something to herself in Spanish, Maria's mom sipped her coffee, then left us alone in the kitchen. Getting up from her seat, Maria hugged me before giving me a passionate kiss that made me forget all about Camilla and Hugo. Slowly pulling away, she looked me in the eyes and sighed.
We'll get back to that, but right now I need to ask you something. My dad isn't feeling so good. My mother's been looking after him, but she needs some rest. I was thinking we could stay here tonight just to help out. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, no problem. What's wrong with him?
I don't know. My mother says he keeps wandering off. 2 nights ago, she found him in the jungle talking to a tree. It's not just him, though. She's acting funny, too. When I got here, she was staring at the wall, smiling. She didn't move till I touched her. She didn't know I was there, but when she saw me, she started acting normal. I think something's wrong with both of them.
The look of concern on her face took priority over everything I was thinking. After taking a while longer, we decided to stay a few extra nights if we needed to. Eventually, I got around to asking about the Gilroy situation and the new people that I'd seen. I was surprised when she said everyone agreed to Gilroy's terms. The locals would farm and hunt for the compound, and in return they'd get to keep their new homes. As a bonus, they'd get access to the fishing vessel. They'd be able to catch more fish than they could eat and bring more money to the island. Another piece of interesting information was that new people were coming from the compound. Maria wasn't sure how many there were, but at least 6 of them, not including the guards, had been visiting the village. Outside of some strange behavior, everyone appeared to be happy. As good as things looked, I had to wonder why they would need our supplies. Their garden provided more than anything we could produce, and now that they had the livestock, they were set. Anything we could come up with would be scraps compared to that. It didn't make sense to me. Putting that conversation off for later, we settled in. Diego let us take his room because he was going to a party in the compound. After Maria and her mother got her father squared away, they spent the better part of an hour corralling Sam. I laughed my ass off watching them chase the kid around. He dodged, dipped, and dove over and swerved around everything in the house before they caught him. It was more of a game than anything else, but it was still fun to watch. Once everything was settled and the house was quiet, Maria and I sat out on the porch. The sound of the island mixing with the music coming from the party was almost hypnotic. It was a beautiful night. The sky was clear, the breeze cool. For a moment, I got lost staring at the stars. They were brighter than usual, or at least it felt that way. I couldn't take my eyes off of them. Everything around me drifted away. There was nothing but me and the stars. I imagined myself soaring through the universe, seeing galaxies and planets I'd never heard of. Alien landscapes made of obsidian crystals taller than the tallest skyscraper. Immense valleys with rivers of liquid glass under skies of rolling purple and pink clouds. Everything was so intensely vivid that it almost felt real. There was a point I could feel shards of ice pelting me, sending shockwaves across my skin. That's when I knew something was wrong. The last time I tripped this hard was on Salvia. This wasn't normal. Forcing myself to look at the ground snapped me out of it. For the first few seconds, I was disorientated. My head was spinning, and I had to take a deep breath to sober up. Once it had completely worn off, I glanced over at Maria. She was staring straight ahead with a smile on her face. Following her line of sight, she was looking into the jungle. There was nothing there, but whatever she was seeing had her captivated. Calmly putting my hand on her shoulder, I tried to get her attention. Hey, look at me. It's not real. Focus on my voice. Look at me. Slowly turning to face me, she smiled, then shook her head.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
Her pupils were dilated, and her words were slurred. She was out of it. After a few seconds, she got extremely sleepy. I had to help her to bed to keep her from falling flat on her face. With Maria down for the night, my curiosity got the best of me. Staying quiet, I set my mind to searching the house. The only thing I'd had since arriving was a glass of water, so I started there. The village water comes from a pair of wells located on either side of the compound. Lucky for me, there were several full jugs in the kitchen. I tasted a little from each one. They all smelled normal, and there was nothing floating in it, so I sampled it, and nothing happened. With the water eliminated, I had to retrace my steps. The only thing that stuck out was the stew. Maria was eating it before we kissed. If the food was drugged, everyone in the house had been drugged, except me. The kiss must have given me just enough to get high. The old man talking to the trees made a lot more sense now. Rather than risk another hit, I decided not to eat anything. Water would have to do. Feeling my theory was right, I checked the last of the stew. It was thick, packed with vegetables and pork. The smell made my mouth water, but I fought the urge to taste it and grabbed a spoon. Stirring it around, I noticed a slight white film on the walls of the pot. Rubbing a little off with my finger, I took a taste. It was salt. The one thing we didn't have much of was salt, so most of us used it sparingly. To see it used like that felt off. I closed the pot, turned around, and nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw Samuel walk by the doorway. Shit! Hey, bud, what are you? I trailed off, noticing the blank expression on his face, arms hanging limp at his side, and staring straight ahead. He shuffled to the front door and tried to walk through it. I watched him bump against it a couple times, then finally reached for the knob. He fumbled with the locks for a moment before getting it open. I should have stopped him right then. Instead, I kept an eye on him till he stepped out onto the porch. Rushing to stop him, I hurried over and grabbed him by the shoulder. The instant I made contact, he collapsed. For a second, I thought it was a joke.
Sam? Quit messing around, man. You shouldn't be out here. Get up.
He didn't budge. I could see he was breathing, and his eyes were open, but he wasn't responding. Before I could say anything else, he sat up, blinked a couple times, and started screaming. My instant reaction was to step back. When I did, I bumped into Maria's father. The shock of seeing him there caused me to flinch, but the old man didn't react. Instead, he walked past me like I wasn't there. When he stepped through the doorway, Sam stopped screaming. The old man didn't react to him either. He just kept walking. Sam slowly got up and followed. I didn't know what to say. The whole thing was freaking me out. All I could do was watch the two of them as they shuffled off towards the compound. I didn't snap out of it till Maria and her mother came walking by. There was no way I was letting Maria go with them. Before she could get away, I grabbed her, shoved her in the house, and closed the door. She reacted the same as Sam. She collapsed, then started screaming. The next few minutes were chaos. Still screaming, Maria got up and tried to leave. When I stopped her, she attacked me. After being punched, kicked, and bitten, and headbutted, I managed to keep her from getting out. Unfortunately, she didn't give up. There was no reasoning with her. In the end, I locked her in the restroom, but that was a mistake. She broke the window and escaped. I opened the door in time to see her running off. The chase was on. I was out of the house and on her trail in no time. What I didn't account for was the rest of the village walking to the compound. Keeping my eyes locked on Maria, I weaved through the crowd trying to catch up. When I was finally able to put a hand on her, it was too late. We were at the entrance. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't a lavish buffet. There was a huge table with a whole roasted pig surrounded by fresh fruits and vegetables. Surrounding that were serving trays piled high with different types of bread. The smell was unbelievable. The crowd around me groaned in unison, anticipating the meal. It was the first sound they'd made, and it made my skin crawl. We needed to get out of here, but Maria wouldn't budge. The more I tugged at her, the more she resisted. It didn't take long for some of the guards to notice. They didn't move on me, but they knew I wasn't like the others. I hadn't seen any of the Gilroys yet, but there were plenty of new faces wandering around. Some were dancing to the music, others were laughing and having drinks at smaller tables. None of them seemed bothered by the crowd of drooling villagers standing at the gate. After a few minutes, Anton, along with his sons, came out of the house and stood overlooking the party. For a moment, I thought one of them would give an elaborate speech that ended with, "Let the games begin." Instead, one by one, they made their way down to the buffet table. Each of them took their time preparing a modest plate, then went to the table that had been set up for them on the far side of the party. Francis, Anton's eldest son, gave Tex a nod. Then the big man said something into the radio he had clipped on his shoulder holster. The music stopped, and everyone who'd been partying calmly walked to the buffet to fix themselves something to eat. Once they were seated, there was a long moment of silence. All I could hear was a slow warbling sound coming from the speakers. It was barely noticeable, but when the pitch changed, Maria and the rest of the villagers reacted. Their vacant expressions shifted to wide-eyed delight as they slowly began smiling. I'd seen enough. If Maria wouldn't come willingly, I was going to throw her over my shoulder and carry her out of there. When I pulled her out of line, the music came back on, and the villagers rushed to the buffet table. Snatching her arm out of my grasp, Maria darted off to join them. They ate like animals, stuffing fistfuls of food into their mouths and fighting over parts of the roasted pig. Meanwhile, the partygoers sat at their tables, carrying on normal conversations. The Gilroys, on the other hand, were watching every second, as if they were taking notes. Stuck somewhere between horrified and mesmerized, I stood there watching as they devoured every scrap of food on the table. When they were done, some of them danced and drank while others puked and passed out. Maria was in the latter half. She was sprawled out next to a pool of vomit. Ignoring the smell, I picked her up and carried her home. I spent most of the night waiting for her to get up and start acting crazy again. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I know, it was morning, and she was gone. Panicking, I jumped up, looked around, then rushed outside to find her. The search didn't take long. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw her. She was sitting next to our fire pit, sipping a cup of coffee. When she saw me standing there, she smiled.
Morning, el café está listo. Come sit down.
Hesitating, I stood in the doorway, studying her for a second, before I walked over and sat next to her.
Are you all right?
When Maria saw the look on my face, she paused.
I'm okay. Why? What's wrong?
What's wrong? Last night's what's wrong. That shit was insane. You can't tell me you don't remember that.
Remember what? I went to check on my family and...
Trailing off, she instantly looked confused. Maria has this habit of scratching the back of her head when she's trying to figure something out. When she brought up her arm this time, she winced and gasped when she saw the cuts on the back of it. When I told her what happened and how she'd cut herself crawling through the window, she couldn't believe it. The last thing she remembered was sitting down to eat a bowl of stew. She had no memory of going to the compound, the buffet, or getting sick. As I started telling her about the buffet, something dawned on me. I hadn't seen her brothers or any of the other children there. I remembered them walking into the crowd, but when everyone else rushed the table, they were gone. There was too much to process. I was having a hard time making sense of any of this. The only things I knew for sure were the Gilroys were responsible, and we needed to get off this island. After I told Maria everything about the party, she agreed with me, but she wasn't leaving without her family. Getting off of the island was going to be hard. There were only 2 boats we could take. One was the Gilroys' yacht, and the other was the fishing vessel. Both were guarded day and night. Outside of that, we still had to find her brothers and get her parents to come with us. There was a lot to put in motion. The first thing we did was go back to the village. Surprisingly, everyone was there. The younger children were playing, and most of the adults were working in the garden. The few that weren't had gone out on the fishing vessel with some of the guards. We spoke with a few of our closest friends, but none of them took us seriously. By the time we found Maria's parents, it was clear no one was going to believe us. The conversation with them went about as bad as expected. We wound up arguing and ultimately accomplished nothing. Agitated by the argument, we decided to go straight to the source and headed for the compound. When we reached the entrance, we were greeted by Tex and a pair of his goons. The big man looked us over, being sure to linger on Maria a little longer than necessary. He raised an eyebrow and smirked.
Morning, folks. What brings you to our doorstep?
Maria rattled off a stream of curse words in Spanish so fast, I could barely keep up. Tex just looked at her and laughed before responding.
Look here, darling. You keep talking like that, I might take it personal. I don't know what's got you two all worked up, but the Gilroys ain't taking visitors right now. Move along, or get moved along. Go on now, get.
He waved us off like he was shooing away a pesky animal. I'm not sure why, but that crossed the line. Before I knew it, I was yelling.
Visitors? Who the fuck are you talking to? We live here. You and those freaks need to pack up and go, or...
Tex cut me off, snarling.
Or what?
Before thumbing off the safety on his rifle.
Exactly what are you gonna do about it, boy? From where I stand, you ain't in a position to give orders. Don't let your mouth write a check your ass can't cash. Now, like I said, move or get moved. Your choice.
I felt like punching that smug smirk off of his face, but I ain't bulletproof. The last thing I wanted to do was get Swiss cheesed by a hillbilly on a power trip. Glaring at him and putting my hands up, I stepped back. This was a no-win situation. The smart play was to walk away, so that's exactly what we did. By the time we got home, my mind was made up. One way or the other, we were getting off the island. Maria and I spent the rest of the day brainstorming. There was enough raw material on the island to build a couple of rafts, but they wouldn't survive a trip on the open ocean. Stealing one of the boats was our best bet. The problem was, Gilroy's guards had us outnumbered and outgunned. We would have to get on the boat, take out the guards, and get Maria's family out of the village without being seen. Rather than act on it right away, we decided to take a few days to see what we could come up with. I spent my time hiding in the jungle, watching the boats while Maria was in the village, trying to convince her family to help us. On day 1, I noticed the guards only secured the side of the ships facing the island. I'm a decent swimmer, and I consider myself in good shape, but there was no way I could swim out there and climb the side of the boat. Even if I pulled that part off, I'd have to be a ninja or a Navy SEAL to take out the guards. Truth be told, I'd only ever killed one man, and that was in self-defense. This was cold-blooded murder, and I wasn't sure I had the heart to get it done. On day 2, I watched the guards load a few teenagers from the village onto the fishing vessel and head out to sea. The handful of adults they brought to the docks were all young women. They were loaded onto the Gilroys' yacht, where Francis was waiting. It didn't take a genius to figure out what that was about. I didn't see it firsthand, but when those girls left that yacht, most of them were in bad shape. On day 3, shit hit the fan. Just before sunrise, Tex and a handful of guards came in heavy. They kicked in our door and tore our home apart while holding us at gunpoint. When they were done, they torched the place. Afterwards, we were handcuffed, and they used swimming goggles that had been spray-painted black to blindfold us. The last thing I heard was Tex saying,
"Nighty-night."
before something hard hit the back of my head, knocking me unconscious. When I woke up, I immediately puked my guts out. My ears were ringing, my head was throbbing, and it was hard to focus. As my vision cleared, I realized I was cuffed to a table, sitting in an interrogation room. The lights were too bright. They made my eyes hurt. And for a second, I wished I had those goggles. My first coherent thought was of Maria. I needed to know where she was. I swore to myself if they hurt her, I'd kill every last one of them. Before my imagination could get going, the metallic clank of the door unlocking made me jump. Squinting, I focused on the doorway as Francis Gilroy came strolling in. He's around 6'2", slim athletic build with bushy brown hair and an almost friendly-looking face. He was wearing a red Hawaiian print shirt, cargo shorts, and flip-flops. Flashing a goofy grin, he pointed at me with both hands and pretended to try to remember my name.
Victor, right? Yeah, that's it. Slick Vic. How's it going, my guy? Don't answer that. I don't care. I'm gonna make this quick. You know how it is. Places to be, people to see. Thought I'd stop by and check on you. Tex and the guys can get a little rough. Just wanted to make sure you were still breathing.
The sound of his voice made my head throb, but I needed to know what happened.
Where's Maria? If you hurt her, I swear to God I'll...
Do absolutely nothing. Come on, man. Stop it. Sticks and stones might break some bones, but bullets will fucking kill you. Good shit, though. Keep that up. Now, in the interest of time, I'm gonna speed things up. The girl's fine, she's at home with her people, she made her choice. You, on the other hand, are officially persona non grata. If you're caught on our land, there will be consequences. I already know what you're gonna ask next, so here it is. I ain't telling you shit. Don't waste your time asking. Sooner or later, Tex and his guys are gonna come to get you. They'll escort you out, and from there you're on your own. Goodbye, good luck, and fuck off. Don't come back.
With that, he patted his pockets looking for something before turning to leave. As he stepped through the doorway, Paul, the younger of the two, pulled him aside. He was slightly shorter than his brother, with a little more muscle. Instead of the shaggy surfer look, his hair was short and neat. He was dressed in hiking gear and looked like he'd been in the jungle. After a brief conversation, Francis walked away. Paul glared at me, then smirked and closed the door. Francis wasn't joking when he said sooner or later. They left me in that room for 2 days. When they finally took me out of there, I was blindfolded and dumped in the jungle. I'm not sure if it was the thump on the head or the fact that I was starving, but I was having a hard time. My legs were weak. I still had a headache and my left ear kept ringing. It took a while to get my shit together. Once I was focused, it was time to figure out where I was. I know my way around, but Angel's Key is a big island, and the jungle's confusing at night. Picking a direction and walking in a straight line was my best option. I'd either reach the coast or the center of the island. Either way, I'd be okay from there. It didn't take long to catch the scent of salt water and hear the waves crashing against the rocks. That told me everything I needed to know. They'd left me on the west side of the island, near the cliffs. All I had to do was go south till I hit the beach. and I was home. The trip wasn't easy. By the end of it, I was exhausted and alone, staring at the last few years of my life in ashes. Too tired to think straight, I sat there till I fell asleep. The sun on my face pulled me out of a deep sleep. For a second, I imagined Maria laying next to me. The smell of her hair, the warmth of her body. It seemed so real. I could almost touch her. When I opened my eyes, blackened brick and scorched wood brought me back to reality. Once I convinced myself to scavenge through the rubble, I found some of our canned food that hadn't been destroyed. It was mostly Spam and a few cans of beans, but it was good enough. After a quick snack, I got back to searching and managed to find my machete. When I was sure there was nothing useful left, I stood there for a moment, taking it in. Flashbacks of all the great times Maria and I had building the place floated through my mind. A part of me wanted to break down. It would have been easy to throw a pity party and ask myself, why me? Meanwhile, the rest of me wanted to find Maria and get the hell off of the island. My first order of business was to find somewhere to lay low so I could work out what I was going to do. Since the Hernandez camp was vacant, I figured it would be a good fit. On the way there, gunfire echoed around me. It was hard to tell which direction it was coming from, but it had to be Mateo's place. I was in no condition to help. That hit to the head had done some damage. The ringing in my ears had stopped, but the headache was still there, and from time to time my vision got blurry. That, plus the fact they had guns, told me it was time to make myself scarce. I got off the trail and cut through the jungle, hoping to stay out of sight. After a few minutes, more shots rang out. They were further away this time. The echo was faint. Moving slow, staying low, I passed the outer edge of Mateo's farm. From where I was squatting, there was a clear view of his house. By the looks of it, Tex and his guys had tried to kick in the old man's door. There was a body laying on the porch, and the front of the house had been shot up. The guy on the ground was one of the guards. Looked like the old man wasn't fucking around. If they wanted his land, they'd have to take it. In any case, I didn't stick around to see how it played out. I could still hear gunshots when I made it to the Hernandez camp. The old man was still kicking. The thought of Mateo going Rambo on Tex and his goons made me smile. I can imagine the old bastard wearing a red bandana and spouting one-liners while picking off goons with a bow and arrow. Pushing that image out of my head, I started looking around the camp. Their setup was nice. The main house was the biggest. It had the well and had the pig pens. That was where the parents lived with the youngest of their children. To the left of the main house was a smaller house where the two oldest daughters lived. Their area was attached to the chicken coops and sat closest to the path leading in. The third and final house was for the eldest son and sat on the far side of the camp. It had a small garden, which unfortunately had been stripped by Gilroy's guards. In the center of the camp sat a nice-sized fire pit with tables and chairs set up around it. The main house and the farmhouse had that white powder covering everything inside, so they were out. That left the girls' house. Aside from their food being gone, the place hadn't been touched. There was still plenty of daylight left, so once I'd settled in, I did some more snooping around. My first stop was the main house. I knew Hugo kept a hunting rifle somewhere, but that meant going in, and I wasn't sure about that dust. Using a towel I'd found as a mask, I went in moving as quickly as I could without tripping over things. Turns out I was wrong. The dust wasn't everywhere. When I stepped through the doors, the first thing I noticed were the walls. There was a clear line where the dust stopped. It was almost like the splatter pattern coming up from the floor. I'm no expert. I had no idea what that meant, but it seemed odd to me. The dust was in the main room, but the hall leading to the bedrooms was clear. I searched everywhere for that rifle. The only thing I found were 2 boxes of bullets and a nice knife. On my way out, I accidentally tripped and had to grab the back of a chair to catch my balance. When I got outside, I realized my hand was covered with that dust. Rubbing some of it between my fingers, I brought my hand up so I could see it. It looked and felt like salt. I immediately thought back to the stew. Pulling down my mask, I used my fingers to dab a little on the tip of my tongue. It tasted like salt, with a slight bitterness to it. I remembered that flavor from the stew. Spitting it out and dusting off my hand, I moved on to the farm. I was sure whatever the Gilroys were up to, the salt was part of it, but I still couldn't make sense of it. The farm was pretty much the same as the main house. One room had been dusted, and the rest was clear. The difference was, this house was holding some goodies. Found a porn stash along with a few bottles of whiskey and a 1911 ACP with 1 magazine. The mag was loaded, but the gun looked like it hadn't been fired in a while. The stash was behind a loose wall panel in the back of the bedroom closet. That was probably the only reason it was still there. I'd found it by accident. Tex and his guys must have missed it. While having the gun, some food, and a hideout gave me a boost of confidence, there were still some obstacles, the biggest of which was Tex and the goon squad. Even if I could get Maria to go with me, I'd still have to get one of those boats. Of course, I could always go out like Mateo, grab the machete, that rusty-ass .45, and go hog wild till they put me down. I had to laugh at myself. With my luck, I'd pull the trigger, and the gun would blow up in my face. There had to be a better way. As the sun started to set, I got a fire going and opened up the bottle of whiskey. Staring into the flames, taking sips from the bottle, I tried to make sense of it all. A part of me wanted to know why I'd settled for getting off the island without getting shot. Francis said Maria had made her choice. What did he mean by that? If it meant she'd chosen her family over me, I could believe it, but hearing it from Francis made it feel wrong. I needed to hear her say she wanted to stay before I made my next move. Getting into the village wouldn't be hard. Tex and his guards mainly protect the compound. I should be able to walk right in. If she told me she was staying, I'd have to deal with it. But for now, I needed to rest. I wanted to be able to handle myself if things went wrong. And at that moment, I was having trouble getting around. The gunfire stopped not long after I arrived at camp, so I figured Mateo was either dead or hiding. I spent most of the night playing everything out of my mind. I guess the quiet gave me time to think straight. As angry as I was, there was no point in being crazy. All I really needed to do was talk to Maria. The next morning I woke up feeling like shit, but I had to get moving. My plan was to walk into the village and see what happens. If no one stopped me, I'd go talk to Maria. If it went the other way and I was forced to leave, I'd have to walk away if they let me. When I got there, it was a whole different story. Almost everyone was in the communal garden. They were stripping the crops down to the dirt. Some of them looked like they'd been out there all night, but they were still smiling. All of them had that same dead-eyed smirk stretched across their faces as they worked. Scanning through the crowd, it didn't take me long to spot Maria and her family. Hurrying over to where they were working, I waved to get her attention. At first, she ignored me. It was like she didn't know I was there till I called her name. Without stopping what she was doing, she glanced at me and smiled before looking away. There was no moment of recognition, no warmth in her smile. Whatever they'd done to her, the Maria I knew was gone. Something in me snapped. Before I realized what I was doing, I was running straight for her. I got within a few feet before I heard,
"Stop right there."
I turned to see Tex aiming a rifle at me, while another guard headed my way. I managed to shout, "Is this what you want?" before the guy slammed into me. We tumbled in the dirt, and my vision instantly went blurry. All I could see were dark shapes moving around me. Then wham! A hand smashed into the side of my head. The punch didn't knock me out, but if I hadn't already been on the ground, it would have knocked me down. The next thing I know, I'm being carried back to the trail by Tex, and whoever the other asshole was. They took me a good distance away from the village before dropping me in the dirt. As my vision cleared, I glanced up to see Tex standing a few feet away, glaring at me. He spat in the dirt and said,
"You ain't right in the head, are you? That thump to the melon must have scrambled your shit. I'm gonna say this slowly so you understand. Don't come back."
Still a little disorientated, I blinked a few times, attempting to focus my eyes. Wincing, I struggled to my feet and almost lost my balance. Once I was steady, I put my attention on the big man. A combination of confusion and anger washed over me. I had questions that needed answers, but the fog of my brain was making it hard to function. I yelled, "What did you do?" My words came out slightly slurred, and I was having trouble staying upright. Laughing at me, Tex motioned for the other guard to leave and shook his head.
"Yep, scrambled eggs. Good luck, Humpty. Don't get lost on your way home."
With that, he turned and walked away. Watching him for a second, I shouted my question a second time.
What did you do?
Then took a step forward. As soon as my foot left the ground, I knew I fucked up. In the blink of an eye, the ground was racing up to greet me as I face planted in the dirt, and everything went black. I woke up a while later, being attacked by ants. They were all over me. I jumped up and instantly started dancing around like a madman, trying to get them off of me. I was covered in bites, exhausted and nauseous, but in a way, I think they might have helped me. The bites woke me up. Without them, I probably would have laid out there baking in the sun all day. The walk home was itchy and irritating. I couldn't get Maria's face out of my mind. She was like the rest of them now. Just a mindless drone working her life away. I had to get her out of there. The question was, how? The only solution I could come up with was to steal one of Gilroy's boats and go for help. I spent the rest of the day trying to come up with a plan. By sundown, I'd come to the conclusion that there was no easy way to do this. One way or the other, someone was going to get hurt. The question was who and how bad. As the day turned to night, I got a fire started and sat listening to the jungle. Eventually, music from the compound drifted in, conjuring up flashbacks of the feast. An image of the villagers smiling was the first thing I thought of. The vision came with a sound, that low, warbling and pitch change from the speakers. The radio the guards were wearing could have been the problem, but I wasn't sure. My stomach broke my train of thought. I hadn't eaten in a while, and it was about that time. Getting up and stretching, I turned to head to the house, then stopped. There was someone watching me. I couldn't see who it was till the figure stepped out. The flickering light of the fire revealed Paul as he calmly walked towards me. I instantly regretted not keeping that gun with me. When he was close enough to talk without yelling, he stopped.
"Where's the old man?"
He asked while letting his right hand fall to the pistol on his hip. Slightly confused by the question, I shrugged, then looked around.
I'm the only one here. What old man are you talking about?
Glaring at me for a moment, Paul frowned.
"The one that killed my men. I know you know him. I saw you two talking a few days ago. Where is he?"
I snapped. These people had come into our home and turned us into slaves. Now this shithead was basically asking for help. Hell no.
Eat a dick. How's that for an answer? Since we're asking questions, what is this shit? Why are you doing this? Oh, what? You're not gonna answer? I didn't think so. Get the fuck out of here.
He acted like he was about to pull his gun, and I laughed.
You gonna shoot me? Well, go ahead, bitch. Do it. No? Okay then, kick rocks. I'm trying to eat, and you're holding up the process.
Sneering at me, Paul flashed a twisted little smirk before nodding and walking away. The second he was out of my sight, I needed a seat. Out of all the stupid things I'd done in my life, that one ranked on my top 10. He could have easily killed me, and no one would have known it. Once my heart stopped trying to pound its way out of my chest, I sat there for at least an hour before I got up and went inside. The confrontation killed my appetite, so I drank some whiskey and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices coming from outside. Slipping out of bed and grabbing the pistol, I eased my way to the window and peeped out. Tex and two of his men were standing around the fire pit. Gun in hand, I stormed to the front door, ready for whatever came next. When the three men saw me, there was an awkward silence before they started laughing. With a shit-eating grin, Tex raised his mug.
"Morning, Cupcake. Nice piece. Me and the boys were just passing through, thought we'd get a hot cup of joe in us before we got our day started. Do me a favor and keep your finger off that trigger. Those old 45s can be a little tricky. Wouldn't want one of my guys getting nervous at putting a hole in you."
All eyes were on me. I considered shooting the big man in the face, but I didn't know if the gun worked. I was pretty sure they wouldn't fall for a bluff the way Paul had, so I stayed quiet and kept the gun down at my side. Dumping the last of his coffee into the fire, Tex mockingly held up his hand, then chuckled.
The silent treatment. Ooh, scary stuff. Don't get your panties in a bunch. We were just leaving.
With that, his men dumped their cups, then shouldered their packs and headed out, leaving Tex staring me down. The big man strolled over to where I was standing and set his cup on the porch, shifting his attention to the gun in my hand, then back to me. He smirked, then shook his head.
See you around, sport. Make sure you bring that with you.
As he walked away, there was a moment I thought about shooting him. The instant that thought crossed my mind, the big man called out.
Takes a real piece of shit to shoot a man in the back.
I looked at the gun, then at him as he vanished into the brush. The shock of his words had me wondering if he'd read my mind. Was it possible? Did that asshole have some magical ability? Or was he just good at reading people? Either way, I didn't like the fact that he was a step ahead of me. Kicking his cup off the porch, I turned and went back inside. Not only did they know where I was, but they were invading my space with no fear. That settled it. I couldn't stay in the Hernandez camp. If I wanted to get off the island in one piece, I was going to have to stay off their radar till I made my move. I packed my things and left the camp a short while later. If Mateo could dodge those douchebags, so could I. The rest of my morning was spent trekking deep into the jungle, looking for a good place to camp. I wound up settling in an area we called the Black Hole. The canopy is so thick in this area that it stays dark. It took most of the morning to clear a space and build a lean-to. By the time I was finished, I was exhausted, so I crashed for a while and woke up just before sunset. I knew I shouldn't go near the village, but I needed to know if Maria was okay. The last thing I wanted was to get spotted, so I took my time getting there. I must have changed directions a dozen times, covering my tracks and leaving false trails. I heard the compound long before I was close enough to see it. They were playing music all the time now, and the villagers were walking around in a trance. I watched them gorge themselves on anything they could get their hands on. Most of them were naked and filthy, a stark contrast to the pristine homes they lived in. It didn't seem possible for them to devolve so quickly. It was like watching cavemen in a modern setting. After an hour or so, I saw Anton Gilroy, flanked by Tex and Paul. Anton was talking into one of those handheld tape recorders as they calmly walked around, inspecting the villagers. At one point, two villagers, Sylvia and a man named Leo, got a little too close to them. Tex cracked Leo across the head with a collapsible baton, causing him to gush blood from the gash it left. He dropped to his knees, then got up and walked away like nothing happened. The whole time, Paul was taking pictures and pointing out other villagers. I didn't see Maria or any of the younger women in the crowd. That instantly gave me a bad feeling. Moving slowly, I made my way to the opposite side of the village, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. What I saw there made me sick. A handful of men were hoarding what little food was left and violently attacking anyone who tried to get some. As bad as that was, it wasn't the worst thing I witnessed. Lucas, an older man with a huge potbelly, tossed a tomato on the ground. When a young man I didn't recognize tried to pick it up, Lucas pinned him to the ground. At first, I thought he was just going to rough him up, but that wasn't the case. He proceeded to violate that kid in the worst way possible, while everyone stood around eating. When he was done, the kid ate the dirt-covered tomato while he watched. I didn't want to see any more, but I had to find Maria. After searching the crowd as best I could, it became clear she wasn't there. Something else I noticed was the lack of children. I was relieved not to see them, but it still left the question of where they'd gone. Just as I was about to move on, I saw Anton with Tex and Paul watching this group from a distance. After a few minutes, Anton pointed someone out, and Tex charged into the crowd. It took a second to figure out who the big man was going for. When I spotted his target, I was shocked. It was Hugo. I hadn't seen him since that day in the garden. I didn't recognize him at first. Patches of his hair had been ripped out, and he was walking with a limp. Hugo was a sturdy guy, not overly muscular or anything, but you could tell he wasn't weak. Now, he looked withered. His right arm was broken and hanging crooked at his side. I couldn't tell exactly what was causing his limp, but he was favoring his left leg. Shifting my attention back to Tex, I noticed something. The other villagers pretty much ignored him, and the Gilroys. This group was watching them. They kept their distance, sort of feeling him out. When the big man got within a few feet of Hugo, he stopped, pulled his pistol, and shot him in the head. The villagers scattered, taking cover behind things or rushing back to their homes. Tex calmly holstered his weapon, then walked back to where Paul and Anton were waiting. Once they were together, the three of them quickly left the area. I lost sight of them when they cut through the ring of trees that separates the compound from the village. I couldn't move. Maybe it was the shock of the situation, but all I could do was stare at Hugo lying in the dirt. I didn't snap out of it till the music that had been playing stopped. I'd actually tuned it out, but now that it wasn't there, it bothered me. Slowly, the villagers came out of hiding and started walking towards Hugo's body. It reminded me of the night I chased Maria. They were in a trance. They formed a circle around the corpse, all of them wide-eyed and smiling as they stared down at it. A part of me knew what was about to happen, but I couldn't look away. I watched in silence till the music came back on. Then it happened. They tore into him, devouring flesh by the fistful till there was nothing left. Covered in his blood, the people Hugo had once thought of as his family celebrated. They laughed and danced till they passed out. Well, some of them at least. Others found different ways to occupy their time, but I didn't stick around for that part. My last stop was to get a look at the compound. I wouldn't be able to see everything, but I hoped Maria and the others would be there. Fortunately, all I could see was the house and the courtyard. No one except the guards were outside. The gates were closed, and they were patrolling. Even though there wasn't much to see, I stuck around for a while, and it was a good thing I did. After 30 minutes, a group of 3 young women and 4 children were led away from the main house by Anton and a pair of guards. Keeping my distance, I followed them through the jungle to the shipping container that had been camouflaged to blend in. Paul was there with Tex. They were waiting with a couple of teenagers from the village. One of them was Diego, Maria's brother. The other was one of the Hernandez girls. I couldn't remember her name, but I recognized her face. Both of them were in rough shape. It looked like they'd been in a fight, but worst of all, they were smiling. It was that same empty-eyed, forced grin I'd seen on the other villagers. The thought of what they'd done made me queasy. Closing my eyes, I tried to shake it off. When I opened them, I heard,
"Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them."
I listened to him shuffle into position before he spit out more commands.
"Slowly. Stand up and turn around to face me."
Doing as I was told, I got to my feet and found myself staring down the barrel of an AK-47. From there, it was a short walk from there to the camp, and the first person to say something was Tex.
Speak of the damn devil. I was just telling the boss about you, and here you are.
I hadn't realized until that moment that I'd never actually been face to face with Anton. When I thought about it, I didn't know anyone who had. We primarily dealt with Francis, Paul, or Tex. This was the first time I'd been this close to him. At first glance, he looked like an older version of Francis, but when he got closer, I could see Paul in his features. Keeping his distance, the old man narrowed his eyes at me, then nodded to Tex before walking away. The guards that had been with him grabbed Diego and the girl and followed. Tex laughed and pointed at the .45 in my waistband.
Good you brought it. Let me see that thing. Toss it over.
There was no way I was reaching for it, and he knew it. He was trying to get me to shoot.
"Come get it."
Tex glared at me for a long second and burst out laughing.
That's some John McClane shit right there. Come get it. You've seen too many movies, dickhead. Toss that shit, or I'll have Johnny shoot you, and I'll take it.
Slowly bringing my hands down, I did what he ordered and tossed it over. Picked up the gun, ejected the mag, then cleared the chamber before inspecting it, giving the weapon an impressed nod. He glanced up at me, then reloaded it.
So, here's what's gonna happen.
Checking around into the chamber, he turned, aimed at one of the new girls, then shot her in the head. Bringing his attention back to me, continued.
I'm gonna give your gun back. Nice piece, by the way. Then I'm gonna walk you out of here and cut you loose. Not necessarily in that order, but you get the picture. Before that happens, I'm gonna have Jimmy keep an eye on you till Paul and I finish this up.
There were a lot of things I could have said, a lot of questions I could have asked, but what was the point? I kept my mouth shut and nodded while Jimmy zip-tied my hands behind my back. Paul was standing by the shipping containers with one of the girls. After quickly looking her over, he put a pair of headphones on her, then handed her a paper bag. The girl just smiled and nodded as he motioned for her to step inside. One by one, all of them were fitted with headphones and sent in. When he was done, Paul had Tex mark each one with a number. Then he closed and locked the container. Checking his watch, Paul glared at me, then turned his attention back to Tex.
Hold him here till tonight. We should be ready by then. Lockdown is at 1900 hours. Don't be late.
With that, he glared at me one last time before leaving with Jimmy. For the first hour or so, all I could do was stare at that girl's body. I didn't understand why she'd been shot. Tex caught me staring and laughed.
You get used to it after a while, but that scorched brain smell sticks with you.
I couldn't respond for a second. My mind was stuck on the moment he pulled the trigger. She was smiling. Then that bullet punched through her face. I couldn't get it out of my head. Blinking the image away, I looked at the big man and asked why he'd done it. He glared at me and shook his head.
She was sick. She would have died anyway.
Sick from what? The salt? What is this? What did you do?
He scoffed.
I didn't do it. That ain't my lane. But you shouldn't worry about that right now. You, sir, are in deep, and I mean deep, shit. Here's a piece of advice. Save a bullet for yourself. Sometimes it's better to punch your own ticket, if you get my drift.
Get your drift? What? Look, just let me go and you'll never see me again. I'll build a raft. Fuck it, I'll swim as long as I can get off of this island. If I'm gonna die either way, what difference does it make to you? Give me a head start. If I don't make it, I don't make it. At least this way, I get a fighting chance.
No can do, amigo. Besides, you had a chance to leave and you blew it. You wanted to find your woman, I get it, but damn, son, know your limitations. Good try, though. A fighting chance. I'm gonna use that. Anyway, sit tight. We're gonna get moving in a bit.
His version of a bit turned out to be a few hours. We left a little before sunset and walked to the east side of the island. That's where he released me. Rather than handing over a loaded weapon, he took the mag and threw it into the jungle. It was a dick move, but he was smart. I'd have to find it if I wanted to live, and that gave me a chance to slip away while I was searching. As darkness crept in, I looked up and found the magazine near a leafcutter ant nest. I guess luck only goes so far. No pain, no gain. After taking a few stings, I grabbed the mag and got the hell out of there. During the walk to my camp, I heard music, but it wasn't from the compound. A strange, old-timey melody reverberated through the jungle around me. No matter which direction I went, the music was there. After a while, I gave up on going back to camp and started looking for the source. I'm not sure how long it took, but after getting turned around a few times, I found what I was looking for. They'd mounted battery-operated radio to the trees and painted them so they were hard to see. I'd stopped to take a piss and happened to look up. They'd forgotten to paint the bottom of the radio, and I could see the gray plastic sticking out. I don't know if all of them were like that, but it didn't matter. Once I stepped back and got a good look at it, they were easy to pick out. I suddenly understood why Paul was spending so much time in the jungle. They'd been setting this up since day one. The radios were everywhere. I stood there in shock for a second, looking from tree to tree. Every 50 feet or so, there was a radio. I just spotted my fourth when the music stopped. The sudden silence was a relief. That fucking tune was driving me nuts. Just as I was about to adjust to not hearing the music, a low, warbling hum boomed through the speakers. I remembered that sound. It triggered flashbacks I physically had to shake out of my head to keep moving. I'd strayed pretty far from my camp. The trip back would be tricky in the dark, but it was worth it. There's a lot of places to hide in the black hole. I didn't know what was about to happen, but I knew I didn't want to be out in the open. Gun in hand, I picked up the pace and went off trail. There were plenty of shortcuts. I'd have to deal with the jungle and everything in it, but I was in a hurry. 15 minutes in, I came to a break in the trees near a small stream. Stopping to get a quick sip of water, I took a second, listening to that warbling sound. The pitch changed. From what I'd seen so far, that meant I was running out of time. Kneeling down, getting my face close to the water, I took a couple of sips and stood up. The moment I was upright, I heard laughter, manic wheezing, insane laughter, and it was everywhere. By the sound of it, they were moving. I couldn't see them, so I picked a direction and started running. I was dodging branches and hopping roots, praying I didn't run into anyone before the music started. Ahead of me, I could see the open stretch of field between this section of the jungle and the black hole. As I broke through the tree line, music erupted from the speakers, and all hell broke loose. Naked, laughing villagers came racing out of the darkness behind me. I couldn't tell how many there were, and I wasn't trying to find out. Pushing my body to its limit, I darted across the field listening to them get closer. They hooted and howled, laughing like wild hyenas as they closed the distance between us. The only thing keeping them off was the fact that they kept falling. They moved like they were drunk. If I could make it to the black hole, I knew I'd lose them. It's dark in there when the sun's up. At night, it was like walking around with your eyes closed. I was around 20 feet away from the brush, but someone slammed into me. We hit the ground hard enough to kick up dust. In the confusion, I couldn't see who it was, but I could hear more of them coming. Time was ticking. They'd be on top of us soon. I had to do something quick, or I'd never make it out of the field. My first thought was the gun in my waistband. When I went for it, it wasn't there. I had just enough time to glance down to see it laying a few feet away. Before I could make a move, Daniel, one of the older guys from the village, attacked me. He dove at me while throwing a wild right hand that glanced off my shoulder. The impact didn't do much, but I didn't have time to react. A second, then a third laughing villager jumped into the mix. I took a shot to the head that sent me staggering to the left. As I caught my balance, a woman jumped on my back. She wrapped her legs around my waist and one of her arms around my neck, attempting to choke me out. Her weight forced me to fall backwards, and I landed on top of her. She let out a woof when my weight forced the air out of her. That gave me a chance to roll off of her and get to my feet in time to get blindsided. In the blink of an eye, I was on the ground, getting kicked and laughed at by people I used to call friends. Curling into a ball to protect myself didn't help much. My body took a beating. They stomped and kicked at me to the point I was about to black out. Then, bang, bang, bang. Gunshots rang out from somewhere in the darkness, and I heard bodies hit the ground. I opened my eyes to see the woman that had been choking me running away. She didn't get far. A fourth shot caused her to faceplant in the dirt. Then everything got quiet. Rolling over and sitting up, I looked around and saw Daniel, George, and another guy I didn't recognize sprawled out on the ground. George and the other guy were dead. Daniel was gasping for air. The woman was a good distance away. I couldn't tell if she was dead, but she wasn't moving. After a few seconds, I heard someone whistle. I looked around and spotted Mateo standing just outside the black hole. He motioned to me to hurry, then pointed to the opposite side of the field. There were more villagers coming. The old man wasn't waiting around. He turned and vanished into the jungle as I got up. Seeing another wave of drugged loonies put some pep in my step. I hurried over and grabbed my gun, then ran to catch up with Mateo. Navigating the darkness wasn't easy, but the old man moved like he had the place memorized. We weaved through the jungle, listening to the insane laughter echoing around us. After a few minutes, we came to a shallow ravine that led us to an old hut I'd never knew was there. The place had been retaken by the jungle. Moss and vines covered what was left of the walls, and the roof had collapsed. But that didn't stop Mateo. I followed him through the rubble to a pile of rocks. We hid there for a few minutes till the laughter got further away. Then he reached down behind the stones and pulled up a rope. To my surprise, the rocks weren't real. He used them to hide a trap door. The door led to a small storm shelter. There was barely enough room for the two of us, but no one would find us. Once the door was secure, Mateo turned on the battery-operated lantern and we settled in. It was a 10 by 10 space with a single cot and a few old crates of MREs. After looking around for a second, I had to ask,
What the hell is this place? How did you know this was here?
Picking up a small canteen and taking a sip, Mateo chuckled.
When I first came to the island, I lived here. I built this shelter first, then built the house over it. This room saved my life. A storm destroyed my home. I stayed here for 3 days till I was able to dig my way out. Now, it saves me again.
Now that we weren't running for our lives, I had a chance to look at him. He was in rough shape. There were deep cuts on his face, and his right shoulder was wrapped in a bloody bandage.
Jesus, Mateo. What happened to you? I thought you were dead.
Paul and his ogre came to my farm with their men. They tell me I'm supposed to give them my crops or move to the village. I told them no. One of the men pointed a gun at me, so I shot him. I managed to escape, but the ogre shot me. That's how I got this.
He paused, rubbing his bandaged shoulder, then continued.
They chased me, but they didn't know the island. They got lost, and I came here. Since then, I've been sneaking into the compound, trying to learn what they are doing.
Wait, how are you getting in without being seen?
When the guards go on patrol, they overlap each other. When that happens, one side is completely unmanned. That's when I strike. Once I'm inside, all I have to do is avoid the second set of guards long enough to get in the house. The ogre, Tex, is the only guard allowed inside. He protects their father.
How many times have you gone in? I can't find Maria. I think she might be in there somewhere.
4 times, but there are no adults, only children. I saw Maria with the others. They are being kept in a shipping container. I'm not sure why.
My heart instantly dropped. I'd been a few feet away from her and hadn't known it. As that thought crossed my mind, I remembered what Tex said.
She was sick. She would have died anyway.
The people in that container were dying. Grabbing my gun and hopping up, I stepped towards the ladder and Mateo stopped me.
If you're going after the girl, you won't make it. Wait for that sound to stop. Then I'll go with you.
You don't understand. If she's in there, she's sick. Tex said they were dying. I have to help her. I have to get her out of there.
Mateo shook his head.
Help her how? Are you a doctor? Do you know what's wrong with her? No? Then how can you help her? At best, you live long enough to watch her die. There's nothing we can do for her. All we can do now is try to survive.
I wanted to run to that container and break Maria out of there. But he was right. Even if I made it, there was no point. I couldn't help her. In the end, we waited for the music to stop. While we waited, Mateo told me everything he could remember about the house. For an old guy, his memory was pretty good. He was able to give me the layout of the first floor and where the best hiding spots were. Hours passed, and by sunrise, it was obvious they were shutting it down. As the day rolled on, there were momentary breaks in the music. We tried timing them, but there was no pattern. It seemed random. Sometime around noon, they cranked the volume for 15 minutes. Then they finally shut it down. We waited an extra hour before popping out of our hiding spot. Staying true to his word, Matteo joined me on my trip to the shipping container. At first, everything seemed okay. Then we saw the first body. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Whoever it was, they'd been stripped to the bone. We found 2 more in the same condition, and part of a third hanging from a tree. We both recognized the last one. It was Hugo. He'd been strung up. The rope around his neck was so tight, his face had turned purple. The others had clearly gotten a hold of him. Everything from his chest down was shredded. For some reason, this one smelled worse than the others. The odor was so intense, it made my eyes water. Thankfully, we didn't see any more till we reached the container. The body of the middle-aged man was sitting slumped against it. Matteo said he was one of Gilroy's people, but I didn't recognize him. He hadn't been torn apart like the others. From what I could tell, he'd been shot. There were bloody palm prints around the lock where he'd been trying to get into the container. Wherever this guy was, he tried to get someone out of there. I instantly thought back to that night before. That could have been me. The old man saved my life. I glanced over to him and gave him a nod. Neither of us spoke. I think we were both in shock. Out of all of the death and destruction we'd seen so far, this hit differently. It was sad and confusing. Why hadn't this guy been eaten? Who shot him, and who was he trying to get to? Those questions rattled around in my head till Matteo snapped me out of it. He motioned to me to help him, and we moved the body. Once that was done, he used the butt of his rifle to break the lock, and we opened it. As the hinges creaked, the smell of shit, vomit, and urine slapped me in the face. Gagging, trying not to barf, I swung the door open and stepped back. Tears filled my eyes when I saw what was inside. All of them were dead. Their bodies shriveled, dehydrated husks floating in a rancid stew of filth. There, in the far corner, was Maria. She was curled up in the fetal position, holding her little brother Sam. The sight of them broke me. I stood there crying, unable to look away. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at what was left of the most beautiful soul I'd ever met. Sobbing, I turned and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from there. My body was on autopilot. I could hear Matteo talking to me, but it was just background noise. I walked till I saw the ocean, then sat in the sand watching the tide roll in. I don't know how long I stayed like that. When I finally snapped out of it, Matteo was gone, and the sun was setting. Now that I was aware of what I was doing, I knew exactly where I was. I'd come to our old home on the south side of the island. This was our beach. Getting up and dusting myself off, I pulled the pistol from my waistband and checked the mag. I had 7 rounds left. 3 of those were for the Gilroys. And if it was the last thing I did, they were gonna get them. Remembering what Mateo told me, I made my way to the compound and hid so I could watch the guards. While I was waiting, I counted what was left of the islanders. Out of the original 31, 16 were dead and 4 were missing. Mateo and I were still on the loose, so I didn't count us. That only left 9, and they were all in bad shape. Some of them looked like the people in the shipping container. Their bodies were drying out. As fucked up as it sounds, seeing them reminded me of the food left at the Hernandez camp. Whatever was in that salt was dehydrating them. The few that weren't shriveling were covered in blood and looked like they'd been well fed. Aside from the islanders, there were a few people from the compound in the village now. From what I could see, there were at least 6 of them, all older men and women. The 4 islanders that were missing were all teenagers, so I assumed the same for the compound people. The old man said the children were locked away downstairs. If I could get to them, I was going to free them before I went after the Gilroys. As that thought crossed my mind, the music came back on. Everyone in the village gathered in the street and stood there swaying to the beat. After a few minutes, the music stopped, and that warbling sound took over. The shriveled villagers started laughing hysterically. Then the pitch of the sound changed, and they all took off running. There was another long pause, then the music came back on, and the rest of the villagers sprinted after them. It was just a matter of time until one of them found me. I had to move. The guards were on constant patrol, so it wasn't long till I got my shot. The second the coast was clear, I ran to the entrance and climbed the gate. Once I was inside, I hurried over to a section of dense shrubbery and hid. Now, I had a new problem. I had no idea how to get in the house. I never asked Mateo how he got in. After about 10 minutes, gunfire erupted from the far side of the compound, and the guards flooded to that area. I ran as fast as I could to the patio and tried the door. It was locked, but I used the gunfire to cover the sound of me breaking one of the panels of glass near the knob. The glass fell in, so there was no cleanup. I just hoped they didn't notice the window right away. The place felt more like a museum than a house. Everything was clean and polished. Even the floors had an almost reflective surface. I moved slowly, doing my best to stay out of sight. I made it to the hallway when I heard someone coming in, so I hid in the restroom. After a second, I recognized the voice. It was Francis. He was walking and talking to someone on the radio.
Pops says we're done here once this last purge is over. Get the first group of kids loaded on the fishing boat and take them to the new place. Paul's already on board with some of the guards. Me and Tex are gonna stay here and get things cleaned up. Tourist season is coming. Gotta have this place tip-top before the grand opening. When you come back for the B group, Pops is gonna ride with you, so take the yacht and
He didn't get a chance to finish that conversation. As soon as he passed me, I stepped out and cracked him across the head with the pistol. He dropped like a wet sack, and the radio went sliding across the floor as a woman's voice responded. "Frankie, what happened? Are you still there?" Grabbing the radio and praying, I did my best Francis impersonation and said, "I dropped the radio, I'm fine. Get back to work." I'm pretty sure I sounded like an extra from The Sopranos, but she bought it and responded with, "Whatever, asshole." Laughing to myself, I dragged Francis into the restroom and locked the door. For once, he wasn't wearing sandals. Quickly untying his shoes, I used the laces to tie his hands behind his back and checked him again. He had a pocket knife, a .38 revolver, a baggie of cocaine, and the radio. Now that I was sure he wasn't armed, I got some water from the sink and splashed it onto him to wake him up. In hindsight, I probably should have gagged him. When he came to and realized he was tied up, he tried yelling for help. Rather than covering his mouth and getting bit, I grabbed him by the throat, then pressed the barrel of his gun into his eye.
Shut up! Shut the fuck up! Say one more word and I'll kill you. Not if you understand.
The lack of oxygen made his face turn beet red. I hadn't realized how tight my grip was on his throat. He nodded, and I eased up a little bit, but I didn't move the gun. Now that he could breathe, I leaned in close so he could hear me clearly.
Where are the kids?
Wheezing, trying to catch his breath, he grumbled.
Up your ass. You want 'em? Go find 'em yourself. I ain't telling you shit.
With a slight smirk, I nodded, then hit him in the mouth with the butt of a pistol. The blow was just hard enough to knock out a couple of teeth and split his lip. I popped him 2 more times for good measure, then let go of his throat and grabbed him by the hair.
Where are they?
Spitting a gob of blood in my face, he snarled.
Eat a dick. You're never getting off this island.
Something in me snapped. I put the gun down, then wrapped my hands around his neck and started squeezing. His face changed colors, and his eyes rolled back. I leaned in close, then whispered,
Neither are you.
Up until that moment, I didn't know if I'd be able to do it. Now that I was here, I couldn't stop myself. I kept thinking of Maria. Seeing her laying there with all those other bodies did something to me. Before I even realized what I was doing, Francis was dead. Flopping back into the sitting position on the floor, I stared at his body for a long moment. There were so many emotions running through me, I couldn't think straight. I don't even remember grabbing the gun off of the floor, but the weight of it in my hand gave me something to focus on. As I glanced down at it, there was a loud bang to my right. The door exploded inward from being booted open by one of the guards. Without thinking, I brought up the gun and fired twice as the guard charged in. Since I was sitting on the floor, one of the shots hit under his chin and blew his brains against the ceiling. The sound was deafening, but it got me moving. Getting to my feet, I slipped the pistol into the back of my waistband, then grabbed the guard's rifle and ammo. Ears ringing, heart pounding, I peeped out into the hall. The coast was clear, but someone had to have heard the shots. I made it to the next hallway before spotting another guard. We locked eyes, and for an odd moment, the world seemed to stand still. My gun was aimed directly at his chest, but his was still hanging by its strap on his shoulder. In my mind, things moved in slow motion. In reality, everything happened so fast it was hard to process. He went for his gun, and I pulled the trigger. In a flash, clouds of dust kicked up off of his body, and he dropped to the floor. Moving fast, I went door to door checking the rooms. There were 2 bedrooms and a study, all empty. At the far end of the hall, there was a set of stairs leading down. That had to be where the children were being kept. Moving cautiously, I made my way down, noticing the drastic temperature change. By the time I reached the bottom, I could see my breath in the air. The stairs led me to a door that opened to a large room. It reminded me of prison. There were 8 cells, 4 on the left and 4 on the right. At the far end of the room, there was an observation booth. center of the room had been made up to look like a living room. There was a nice sofa and coffee table set up in front of a television. On the table, there were all sorts of snacks lined up for the taking. The 4 cells on my right were open. I call them cells, but they were more like bedrooms. When I looked inside, each one was made to appear like a teenager's room, but they were empty. After a few minutes, the faint sound of music caught my attention. This wasn't the music from the party or the woods. This was a jingle. It sounded a lot like a commercial. The more I focused on it, I started making out words. 5 new flavors, the kids can't miss. Gotta get 'em all, the new crisp mix. The words repeated over an odd melody as I zeroed in on where it was coming from. It didn't take a genius to figure out it was the cell on the other side of the room. All the other doors were closed. That had to mean there was someone inside. Cautiously crossing the room, I stopped when I got near the living room setup. There was dried blood on the floor. Most of it was old, but there was a fresh pool near the television. I could only imagine what must have happened here. By the looks of it, someone died. Trying not to think about it, I moved on to the cells. Each door had a small observation window to look through. There was a boy in the first room I came to. He was sitting in the corner of his cell, facing the rear wall. His back was to the door, so I couldn't tell who he was, but I was pretty sure he was one of Hugo's kids. I tried getting his attention by banging on the door, but he ignored me. After trying to force the door open and failing, I moved on to the next cell. There was a girl I didn't recognize in this one. She had short blonde hair, a sort of chubby face. She sat on the bed, rocking side to side, smiling and humming along with the jingle. I knew she could see me, but she never stopped rocking. I already knew I couldn't open the door, so I moved on to the next cell. I was just about to look through the window when the entrance door slammed shut and the lights went out. I couldn't see shit. It was the type of darkness that makes you feel blind. I actually had to check to be sure my eyes were open. I'd been facing the door when everything went black, so I stepped forward till I hit it. Putting my back to the door and tightening my grip on the rifle, I tried to focus. Someone cranked the volume of the music for a few seconds, then it stopped. Nerve-wracking silence crashed down on me for a brief moment. Then the television in the center of the room blared to life. Images of smiling kids racing to the table full of snacks flashed across the screen, then a burst of static, and it shut off. I could hear footsteps now. There was someone else in there with me. Whoever it was, they were running. Since I couldn't see where they were, I fired into the darkness, hoping the muzzle flash would reveal them. It didn't work. All I managed to do was waste ammo and get blindsided by one hell of a punch to the side of my head. The first shot buckled my knees, but I didn't fall. I fired off a few more rounds before the second blow dropped me. When I hit the ground, I let go of the gun. The fucking thing could have been right next to me, and I couldn't see it. The next thing I know, someone is kicking the shit out of me. After the second or third impact, a voice grunted.
You killed my brother, you piece of shit!
It was Paul. He was dancing around, beating the hell out of me. Kicks and punches rained down on me from every direction, but I couldn't see them. At one point, I felt for the gun in my waistband. He grabbed my wrist. I had him. Using my free hand, I grabbed his arm and pulled as hard as I could. The sudden movement brought him down on top of me, and the fight was on. We wrestled, fighting for control of the pistol. He was strong. I was having a hard time till we bumped heads. That's when I realized he was wearing night vision goggles. The impact of the accidental headbutt must have shifted them. He instantly started complaining about not being able to see. With his attention divided, I managed to get control of the gun, but the fight wasn't over. I kept expecting the gun to go off. One of us was going to get shot, and I was hoping it wasn't me. I was in the process of trying to jam the barrel into his gut when the lights came on. I suddenly found myself surrounded by techs and a few of his men. All of them were aiming rifles at me. The big man shouted,
"Party's over. Drop it."
Fuck that. Let me out of here or I'll kill him.
Go ahead and do it. Shoot him. I don't like the motherfucker anyway. You do him, we'll do you, and everyone goes home happy. What you waiting on? Shit, or get off the pot. Pull the trigger.
The big man may not have known it, but he just played his hand. As long as I had Paul, the guards wouldn't shoot. Now that I knew that, it was time to leave. Forcing him to his feet and using him as a shield, I made my way to the door and demanded to be released along with the kids. Tex scoffed and wagged a meaty finger at me.
Can't do that, House. Those youngins are worth their weight in gold. You, on the other hand, ain't worth a hot shit. I guarantee you that rattlesnake you just put in your pocket is gonna do more harm than good. Go ahead, take your chances. I'll see you later.
With that, he motioned for his men to lower their weapons, then dug a small remote out of his pocket. Holding it up for me to see it, he hit a button and the door opened behind me. Keeping Paul between me and the firing squad, I backed into the stairwell and had him stop in the doorway. Taking careful aim at the back of his head, I shouted, "You're right!" then pulled the trigger. I was running up the stairs before his body hit the ground. I raced through the house, praying I didn't run into any more guards. In the heat of the moment, I must have made a wrong turn. I found myself in a part of the house I didn't recognize. At first glance, everything seemed normal till I looked out the window and saw the New York City skyline outside. The windows had been replaced with screens. I didn't know if it was a live feed or a looped screen, but it looked the part. If I didn't know where I was, being in this part of the house would have screwed with my mind. I didn't have time to take it all in. I could hear the guards coming. Call it luck or divine intervention, but this area led me to the rear of the compound. That meant the Gilroys' private dock wasn't far away. I'd have to cross some jungle without getting caught, but there was a shot at 2 boats if I could get there. I was thinking too far ahead. The first order of business was getting my ass out of the house. I hated leaving the kids behind, but I didn't have a choice. By the time I'd made it to the rear of the compound and found a way out, all hell had broken loose. The guards were hot on my heels and I was dodging bullets as I ran. The jungle around the compound was a war zone. The remaining villagers were fighting each other, but the second they spotted me, they joined in the chase. As crazy as it sounds, they actually did me a favor by coming after me. They acted as a buffer between me and the bullets. Once a couple of them dropped, they turned and attacked the guards. I don't know exactly what happened, but when the gunfire stopped, the screaming started. I didn't look back. I ran till I couldn't run anymore, then stopped to catch my breath. While I was sucking wind, I realized the music had been playing the entire time. It wasn't as loud as it had been, and it seemed far away. Looking around, I understood why. There were no speakers on the trees here. They'd left themselves a clear path out. I had to be close to the docks. Once I'd gathered myself and got moving, I started hearing voices. They were faint at first, but the further I went, the clearer they became. Before long, I was crouched in the bushes, staring at the docks. Anton, Tex, and a young red-headed woman were loading the kids onto the yacht. I recognized one of them instantly. It was Maria's brother, Diego. He looked a little rough, but it was him. Shifting my focus, I scanned the area. There were no other guards around. It was now or never. I couldn't let them get away. Taking a deep breath, I aimed at Tex and fired off 2 shots. I didn't expect to hit him at that distance. I just wanted him to scramble so I'd have time to get down there. The funny thing is, one of the bullets caught him. I saw him grab at his shoulder and duck for cover as I moved in. There was nothing for me to hide behind, so I ran as fast as I could to some rocks on the edge of the beach. At this point, Gilroy and the girl were hurrying the kids on board. They were in the process of getting them below deck when Tex fired back at me. His shots pinged off the rocks, kicking up dust on impact. When I ducked, the big man made a run for the boat. He just started yelling,
Start the engine!
When I popped up and fired till the gun clipped empty, Tex dropped to his knees, then flopped face down in the sand with his gun in his hand. Time was ticking. I raced across the beach, hearing the sounds of someone trying to start the boat. When I was close enough to grab the big man's gun, he popped his head up, flashed a bloody grin, then pointed the pistol at me and fired. They say your life flashes in front of your eyes when you're about to die, but all I saw was the muzzle flash. The shot was slightly off to the right, but it grazed the side of my head and I dropped. I thought I was dead, till I heard the engine start. I guess that had been the big man's final attempt, because he was laying there, eyes wide open, not moving. Scrambling to my feet, I grabbed his gun and rushed onto the ship. The first person I ran into was the girl. She was about to say something when I cracked her across the head with the pistol. Her reaction shocked me. She swayed, then blinked a few times before staggering back and falling over the rail. Moving quickly, I made my way to the controls where I found Anton waiting for me. Holding up his hands, the old man glared at me and spoke for the first time.
You can't undo what's been done. We are...
I pulled the trigger and put a hole in his head before he could finish talking. It was over. I flopped down in a nearby seat, watching his blood pool on the floor. I'm not sure how long I sat there before the sound of the kids yelling below deck snapped me out of it. Once they were all freed, we spent the rest of the day searching for survivors. No one made it. I eventually found Mateo. He'd been hung from a tree and beaten to death. Not sure which happened first. After days of burying bodies, I searched the compound and the yacht for answers. What I found was a box of tapes recorded by Anton and a few flash drives containing video footage of the villagers. There were hours and hours of footage and recordings chronicling the process of a new food additive that, when exposed to a specific frequency, turned the consumers into violent animals. From what I could tell, that wasn't what it was intended to do, but once the investors saw its potential, tests were ordered. Some of the recordings alluded to other test sites, but in the end, the product was approved for distribution. To be honest, I didn't understand half of it. What I did know was I couldn't stay on Angel's Key. I'd never be able to get the images of what happened there out of my head. When I told the kids, let me rephrase that, Most of them were teenagers. A couple were nearly adults. In any case, when I told them I was leaving, most of them chose to stay. Diego, on the other hand, chose to come with me. We packed everything we thought we needed on the yacht and set sail. Eventually, we wound up in the Gulf of Mexico and were taken in by the Coast Guard. I told them my story, and the island was investigated. I don't know how, but someone had the island cleaned up before the authorities could get there. My story was discredited, and I was shipped back to the States. Since Diego was a minor without papers, he was deported, or at least that's what I was told. In the end, I was extradited back to Florida, where I was arrested for the murder that caused me to run in the first place. Like I said in the beginning, I was cursed at birth, but it gets worse. I went to the store on my first week in and nearly shit myself. Every product in the commissary was made by Gilroy Foods.